I will click the recording button. We will record the webinar, and we will send you a link to the webinar recording in the next couple of days if you wish to review it again or listen to it any further. So just a reminder, if you have any questions or comments during the webinar, please type the question in, and in webinar jargon, raise your hand. Those of you who were at the ATSA conference last week, welcome back to a further discussion on ESS BIZGRANTS. What I'm showing you at present on the screen is the home page area when you first log on to ESS BIZGRANTS. And we'll come back to this area a little bit later on during today's webinar. So I'm just logging in. And I've partly prepared a profile for a client to save a bit of time in a webinar recording. But there is some information explaining the process that a subscriber can see. And in fact, you can all be a subscriber within ESS BIZGRANTS, because we offer a 14-day non-conditional guest login to each of you. And I'll show you how you can access that later on. So you'll then be able to see this material that I'm showing you at present, which will allow you to better understand this process of identifying grants. But what we want to go to first of all is a client profile. Now I've started to prepare one. I'll just go to the bottom of all these others that we've been utilizing, and I'll go back to the beginning. So I've started with a company which I've called ABC Sheet Metal Works, or Sheet Metal Industries Proprietary Limited. It is a company, but it could have been identified as being any of these other types of entities. One of the very important points with government grants is that not every type of entity is eligible for every grant. In fact, the only entity category that is basically eligible for every grant is a company. The next question is, does the business export? Now, this business has got 25 employees. It's been in business for 8 years, has a turnover of $3.2 million, does some research and development, and does some exporting and importing. So I've already ticked that it's an exporter. We've ticked that it does some importing. I told you before it had 25 employees, and what I'm showing you on the screen at present is the employee bands that we've utilized based on our analysis of the grants which are included within ESS BIZGRANTS. So we've identified with 25 employees, it's in the 20 to 200 band. Do you have an ABN? We've answered yes. You won't be able to access grants unless you are able to indicate that your client has an ABN. The next very important question, and it seems to be becoming more important, is how many years has the business been operating? So we've indicated that over 3 years, but the years of operation could have fallen into these other bands, and nil is a band. So a complete startup can apply for some grants. And in fact, the feature grant that we're going to look at as part of this webinar today, Accelerating Commercialization, you can apply as a pure startup, no years of experience. But we'll come back to that a little bit later. The turnover is the next important question. There are a number of different bands of turnovers within the various grants. I told you before, this business, this mystical business, I hope it is anyhow. If not, my apologies if someone else has already got that business name. $3.2 million turnover falls in the $1.5 to $20 million turnover band. that we have developed. Is the business registered for GST? The business needs to be registered for GST because all government grants are paid with an added amount for the GST. The question is, are you tax exempt? If your client answered yes for that, or you answered yes for them, then you will not be shown any grants because ESS BIZGRANTS is targeted at businesses. And is the business involved in research and development? Now, we haven't asked whether you're going to be eligible for the tax deduction for R&D, and obviously this business here potentially could have been because they are a company. But at this stage, we're not really interested in whether they've spent more than $20,000 or in fact whether they are a company, because someone undertaking research and development could be targeted for some of the other grants, particularly accelerating commercialization that I'm going to discuss with you shortly. So we've answered yes to that because this business does do research and development every year. So we'll save that. Now, in the details, you've got a summary of the entity again. That's just repeating our business. I decided this mystical business, was located in 2nd Avenue, Leichhardt, primarily because I was in Leichhardt on Thursday in New South Wales. Its postcode is 2040, and the postcode then identifies that Leichhardt is situated within a major city of Australia, obviously Sydney. The financial data is just repeated back to us. The next question we had was the business industry code. Now, if you know the code because you're doing the tax return, you can just insert the code where I'm highlighting at present. If you don't know the code, all you needed to do was to insert the keyword applicable to that client. So I've gone through and identified and inserted the keywords related to sheet metal, and the system has identified this category. There are other categories that could have come up, and you could nominate more than one category of engagement if you wished, but we've identified this one. So once you've done that, it is possible then to just move to search grants. And the system is saying that 21 potential grants have been identified. And the first one is accelerating commercialization, which is very convenient because this grant is our feature grant that we were going to do a bit more talking about in this webinar today. So accelerating commercialization assists eligible entrepreneurs, researchers, startups, commercialization officers within universities and approved research organizations. Individuals and businesses can submit an application, but the condition is that if they are invited to participate in accelerating commercialization, in other words, to receive a grant, they must then incorporate a company. So the government will only fund applicants for accelerating commercialization if they have incorporated a company or have a company. But individuals, partners in a partnership can apply in the first instance. There is no compulsion to incorporate a company to merely submit an expression of interest. So successful applicants will receive an invitation to be part of this overall scheme. There are some fringe activities. Successful applicants are invited into the export network, and some invitations will be given to them to participate in some investment pitches to business angels and to venture capital funds. Now, the grants can be up to $1 million for the exception of commercialization officers, and their grants are restricted to $250,000. Applicants have to be able to contribute 50% of the total project. So if the project's going to cost $2 million, the grant funding could be $1 million, but the applicant needs to be able to identify where they will get their $1 million from. They don't need to have that money on day one, but they need to be able to articulate in a budget and cash flow forecast and other financial information where their contribution is going to come from. Now, that contribution could be coming from investors, and the investors could submit letters of interest to participate with a condition that they will only contribute funding if the applicant is successful in the accelerating commercialization application. Oz Industry and the entrepreneur program accepts that type of arrangement. So you could do that for your client if you wished. There needs to be an accountant's declaration lodged with the application, and that is primarily looking at what the applicant is saying they are going to do to source their share of the funding. The key thing in all this is that the applicant must develop a product, process, or service. The applicant must also have ownership or the beneficial use of the intellectual property that is going to be utilized in the project. The applicant's turnover can be nil, but it must be under $20 million for each of the last 3 years. This is a two-stage application process. The first stage is to submit an expression of interest, and once feedback is obtained from the commercialization advisors, who are private enterprise contractors who have been recruited by the government around Australia, there's about 30 of them. Once they've given feedback, the final application can then be lodged. But a word of warning, you need to have really thought through the application process prior to lodging the expression of interest. Because you could miss out, or your client could miss out, through the submission of insufficient information in the expression of interest component. Another very important point in this funding is that the government will fund the applicant up to the point of first commercial sale. Now, that's a sale made at what you consider or the client considers to be the realistic sale price. Now, normally that would need to be backed up by some market research. I've had a situation where the market research said that a product could be sold for about $13,000 plus GST. The client did a deal with some companies within the industry they were wanting to support, the mining industry, to sell them fairly advanced prototypes, but not the completed product, so that they could get feedback from those companies for $3,500 each, so that they could be field tested within the mining industry environment. The government accepted that that was not the first commercial sale, because the sale was not being made at a price that an independent market consultant had indicated that he thought the retail price would be at $13,500. Now, the funding covers a wide range of activities, which can then be deemed to be eligible expenditure. Labour on cost, cover holiday pay, long service leave, superannuation, etc. Contract expenditures, so contracts can be entered into. plant expenditure, depreciation on special plant that's been acquired for this project, prototype expenditure, and other expenditure. Now, all this needs to be detailed in the application, but it's a good idea to have prepared a budget prior to submitting the expression of interest. Now, for $1 million grant, you'd expect the government to have some fairly tough criteria that your client has to satisfy. The first one is the need for funding. And basically, the government will not proceed any further unless this has been adequately answered. Now, the vast majority of small, medium enterprises should have no problem satisfying the need for funding. But you need to be serious about your answers to that question, because your application can be ruled out on this very point. You must satisfy the entrepreneurs program that your client needs the funding. And then you need to identify that there is a market opportunity. So there needs to have been some market research prior to this application being submitted. The next key area is value proposition. If the product needs to be sold for $13,500, is there a likelihood that there will be customers at that price? The next area is the execution plan. How is your client proposing to go about this? What are the management capabilities of the client? Or has the client accepted that they have some management deficiencies? And are they going to identify in the expression of interest and obviously in the application that they will be using some of the funding to hire in experienced executives? And what are the benefits for Australia out of this program? So these 6 key questions need to be answered, most definitely in the application, but you should have thought them through in the expression of interest. The Accelerating Commercialization Grant is targeted at the so-called growth industries as specified by the federal government. There are 6 main categories and then 4 other support categories. The 6 main categories are advanced manufacturing, food and agribusiness, medical technologies and pharmaceuticals, mining equipment technologies and services, oil, gas and energy resources. Now, when you go through and analyze those back into individual business types, you will find that there's over 550 business types come under those 6 categories. The enabling technologies, and the definition here is that these businesses must have done direct work for any one of those 6 major categories or be proposing to do work for them. Covers freight and logistics, infrastructure related construction, ICT and professional services, but primarily in the scientific categories. Payments are made in accordance with your budget that is submitted with the application, with the government paying 50% of the projected expenditure, or whatever the percentage is the government's grant is going to be to the total expenditure. If you underspend in the first quarter, it will obviously affect the amount of money that you're going to be able to draw down in the second quarter. Project reporting requirements are that your client has to report on a quarterly basis. And at the end of the total project, an audit certificate needs to be submitted. Not by a registered auditor, but by a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants or the CPAs. And that is an approved expenditure under the program. So that's the summary that I wanted to give you today on the accelerating commercialization. Obviously, you'll be receiving a recording or access to a recording of this webinar. And I will also send you a summary of those key points on accelerating commercialization. and we will send you the paper that we have written that is part of ESS BIZTOOLS that has all of the details relative to the Accelerating Commercialization Grant included in it. If you have any questions relative to the Accelerating Commercialization Grant, please don't hesitate to send me an email at the end of the webinar. And indeed, if you have any specific questions now that you would like to raise on accelerating commercialization, could you please send them through by typing in your question and raising your hand, and I will answer them a little bit later in this webinar. So I've, in the meantime, clicked on funding, and the funding is summarized as from a small amount, $10,000, up to $1 million on a 50%. In our system, if you then want to go to the toolkit, and what I'm now showing you is identical for every grant within ESS BizGrants, you can read the paper that I'm going to send you, which is the paper on the Accelerating Commercialization Grant. There's a lot in this. It's $1 million grant, non-repayable. You'd expect the government to have laid down a whole range of rules. So that's, we've just got through the index, and then there's a whole stack of material there as to how this grant operates. Now, there is substantial sums of money being handed out by the Entrepreneurs Program in association with Oz Industry on this grant. If you have a client who has developed a new product, process, or service that you think might be eligible, I would suggest that you process it. Then there's some additional criteria, because what we're trying to do here is work our way down into a funnel to determine whether the client might be successful. Has the applicant developed a novel product, process, or service? Well, we say they have. If the applicant is not a company, will the applicant agree to become a company if they're going to get funding? We'll say yes. Does the applicant have the ability to fund 50% of the project and complete the project over 2 years? They can do it quicker if they want to, but the maximum is 2 years. We'll say yes. Can the applicant justify that funding is required? That's answering that first criteria. Is funding required? We have included it there as a question to emphasize the importance of that question. And does the applicant have the ownership or control of the intellectual property? That was the other big requirement. They can't copy someone's IP without their approval, obviously. So we'll answer yes. Now, if you were watching closely, the system then brought up apply now. And if we click onto that URL, it will take us to the government website where we'll be able to ascertain the expression of interest form. Now, that takes a little time, so we won't do that. We'll close that now. The system is now determining the grants. Notice the number's now gone from 20 to 21, and under potentially eligible, we now have that grant, Accelerating Commercialization. If we go back to pending, we'll just pick a couple more of these. My apologies once again for my wonky voice, and I don't want to get to a situation where it runs out on me. I thought it was going to do that last Tuesday, so at the ATSA conference, but I got through my presentation there. There are a number of apprenticeship grants. Apprenticeship grants are basically available for every type of employer. I just want to pick on a couple of others. This business is in New South Wales, so you can see New South Wales grants are coming into the equation. But I'm going to pick on Business Growth Grant, Advanced Manufacturing, because this is a very popular grant that I just wanted to draw to your attention. It's a grant that again is targeted at those key industries, and it applies for businesses with a turnover of over 1.5 million. They must be companies. But if they're located in Northern Australia, that's north of the Tropic of Capricorn, and someone said to me in Sydney, was that because North Queensland Cowboys won the NRL Grand Final? The government give them a special exemption on this program. I said, no, that's not the case. This was announced early in September. The funding is up to $20,000. The additional information in the toolkit will give you information as to how this particular grant operates. Basically, you can do anything which the government agrees with that will potentially improve the performance of your business or your client's business. There's a lot of work accountants can do under this grant. Things like budgets, cash flow forecasts, debtors reviews. We'll go to the additional criteria. Is the business solvent? We say yes. Has the business been operating in an approved structure for 3 years? So that was one of those key questions back at the beginning. How many years has the business been operating? Has the business ever received a business growth grant or a tailored advisory grant under the Enterprise Connect program? They were the predecessor programs. If they have, you would miss out. So we're going to answer no to this. Does the business provide high value added manufacturing? We say yes. So the system's saying we could apply. Same thing. You will then go to the government grant application. And what the system is now doing is showing that one in potentially eligible. We might just look at a couple of these others. Obviously, in practice, you could work your way through and look at these. Now, business growth grants been repeated. That's because it's a very fine line between advanced manufacturing and the mining equipment area, but you can only get the grant once, so you wouldn't bother going back on there. The other one I want to show you is the Industry Skills Fund, but there are plenty of others there, like the Export Market Development Grant that you could look at. I found out last week at ATSA that a number of accountants weren't aware of the Industry Skills Fund. It's a grant that supplies different percentages of grant depending on the number of employees. So they're summarised on the screen there now. Micro businesses up to 4 FT, full-time equivalent employees, the grant's 75%. Small businesses up to 19. Medium businesses up to 200 is 50%. And over 200, the grant is 25%. For businesses located in Northern Australia, all those percentages for the first three are now 75%, and large businesses is 50%. That's coming out of the Northern Australia Development Fund that the government announced in the federal budget. So this grant is targeted at the priority industries, but businesses in other industries can apply. In fact, I know quite a number of businesses in other industries that have successfully applied. So the funding is various. There is no upper amount listed as to what the amount of the actual funding might be. It depends on the skills development program that has been tailored for this particular business. So you can read the paper on this particular grant. Businesses must be going for growth to apply for this grant, because they must be able to identify that the skills improvement will improve their operations in a particular area. So as you can see, there's a detailed paper there which we've produced, which will take you through how this grant operates. The government recently changed the rules for this grant. Initially, you had to be a company or a corporate trustee for a trust. The rules have been changed so that now any type of business can apply to get access to this special funding. There are skill development officers that have been engaged by the government. They're working for private contractors. So if you wish to identify them, you can go onto the federal government website. I have asked the government to give me a list of those people, and hopefully we will get that. And if I have it by the time we're sending the details of the link to the webinar for this webinar recording for this webinar, I will include the details for you. They were on the website, but they disappeared a few weeks ago, and I've asked for them to either be replaced on the website or if they'll give them to us to send to our subscribers and firms like you. We might just look at the additional criteria. I'm going to answer yes to that. We haven't caught up with the change in that question because it's now any type of business. So I'll answer yes, so the system operates. There's some rules that if they're from New Zealand, they have to have been in Australia for 6 months. So you can see the question there. We'll answer yes so we can demonstrate. Is the business positioning itself to take advantage of the growth potential? The business must be doing that. This is not teaching people to type. It's teaching new skills. Can the applicant articulate and demonstrate how the gains will help the Australian economy? Hopefully they can. And you've got to be able to demonstrate that there's a link between the training you're doing and what the business wants to do and how the business is going to perform. So we say yes. The business has got to be able to articulate the value for money. And can the business demonstrate that they're able to administer all this? So as long as they've answered all that, they can apply. And the key thing I want to show you now is how this flows through in our system. Now, I'm not going to go through the rest of the grants that are there. If you want to look at them, just click on them. You can read the summary. Then you can answer the questions, and it will throw it through to the potentially eligible category. Obviously, if we'd identified any that were not potentially eligible, they would have been reflected in the potentially ineligible segment. So I've got 3 grants there now that we're saying we think this client's eligible for. We then click on Print Report. And the system is producing a report in the name of the client, ABC Metal. It's dated today. The prepared by would be your name as the subscriber to ESS BIZTOOLS. So you don't have to worry that it's going to be saying ESS BIZTOOLS or ESS BIZGRANTS. And what you're getting to give your client is a précis of some key points of the grant. You can print the paper from the system I just showed you there before. The amount of the funding is shown. There is a disclaimer which basically says the client's still got to run the gauntlet of the application to the government. So no guarantees are being given by you or by ESS BIZGRANTS. We had identified this business growth grant, so there's a basic summary of it and how it applies and the type of activities that might be undertaken. And then you got the Industry Skills Fund, the last one we looked at, which is identifying. So you're then in a position to table this with your client. Our suggestion is that as you're completing the annual financial accounts of the client, you have one of the team enter the profile. That process will take 2 to 3 minutes. 2 for a fast typist, but slower for me. There's no doubt that someone who understands and knows the client will then have to answer some of those supplementary questions, and that could take 5 to 10 minutes to go through and answer those questions. What you're then in a position to do is when the client comes in for a review of their financial accounts, or you go to see the client. In a very proactive manner, you can then identify that you have identified some grants that they may be eligible to apply. Obviously, then putting a question to the client, do you want us to do that, or are you going to do it? In our experience, well over 90% of the clients will say, we want you to proceed and do that for us. There's no doubt that some of the clients will decline. Some people just don't want to have anything to do with a government agency. I have difficulty understanding it, but I'm warning you that some of your clients could perhaps say, no, thank you. What we recommend you do is then open a new work in progress file for your client for the application, that you then proceed with accessing the application forms from the various links that you've now got to the government sites. Complete the application. That will require some discussions with some government officers, especially in a grant like Accelerating Commercialization, which incidentally, for an application for around $1 million, the going rate for consultants and accountants who are working in this area to assist a client to get ready for that grant will be $10,000 to $15,000. There's a fair bit of work to be done on that one. Some of the other ones, there's not that much work at all, but I thought you probably should be aware of Accelerating Commercialization. To get a winning application in, there is a fair bit of work. So you're able to go through the application with a client. Hopefully, when the application is submitted, your client will be successful. At that stage, the client should be determining who is going to attend to various aspects of the work. For the work that your firm is able to do, especially if you've embraced the concept of business advisory services, that work could include budgets, cash flow forecasts, debtors reviews, perhaps even some of the skills development training. Lean management, if you're into that area. I've been involved in grant work under about 15 different category headings over the years, so there's plenty of opportunity for accountants to be offering the services. David Smith, who supplied us a testimonial for this product, ESS BIZGRANTS, had indicated that the key area for accountants is to show clients that you're being proactive in the services that are being provided. And I think that is very, very important. So I'm now going back to the beginning here, and I'm now going to show you David Smith's testimonial. David Smith, for those of you who don't know, is the Managing Director of Smith Inc., who are the presenters of ATSA, Australian Technology Showcase for Accountants, which was held in Sydney last week. And he's also a former president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Australia. And David was quite concerned when he did the due diligence reviews for one of the accountancy aggregators, that when he discussed the accountant's services with their clients, which he was required to do, one of the most frequent areas of complaint he received from SMEs was that their accountants were not keeping them aware of government grants. So hopefully that will be of interest to you. If you wish to get a 14-day trial, you just need to submit the subscription area and then submit it, and the system will then grant you a trial period for 14 days to trial one or two of your clients, just to see how this system works. The system is on cloud technology, so you can utilize the client's name or a reference number or combination of letters and numbers if you wish, because our recommendation is you leave the system or the information in the ESS BizGrants system so that next year all you've got to do is update it. That will speed up the process a little bit more. Now, the pricing for ESS BizGrants is that the free trial costs you nothing, but you can then subscribe. We're continuing our discounted prices for a little bit longer at either $43 per month for the 12-month period or a discounted $450 plus GST. Both figures are plus GST, and that will give you access to it. If you elect to subscribe to ESS BizTools Gold Package, you will receive free access to ESS BizGrants. So I'm going to check once again if there's any questions. I haven't got any. I hope I've answered all your questions. And my voice is just about ready to run out, I think. So thank you very much for participating today. We will send you probably on Wednesday a link to the webinar recording today and some of that additional information that I said I would send to you. If you have any questions that you think of subsequent to this webinar that you would like me to answer, please don't hesitate to send me an email, peter@essbiztools.com.au. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.